This season turn it up to 10. Sorta like a bad habit, we gon' do it again. Ready or not, we're gonna tie up some men. Go tell a 36, try to grab other friends. We're back like we never left. On track like a treble clef. Skip a beat on the 7th rest. Bring feast, we don't pass them over. We got the first fruits, no way to show us. This yoke is easy, this burns light. Even with a loud mouth trying to eat at the mic. Even if we down south, the humidity spike. Veils torn in two, so we gon' be alright. Don't stop, they're in need of it though. Through grace by faith, they could easily grow. New wave, new age, new way to see bro. Now one truth, life, one way to his throne. Can't live on that bread alone. Every word of God's mouth will fuel me on. That's scripture, that's Christ alone. That's grace alone, that's faith alone. All glory to God, cause that's his alone. Since the lamb's been slain, we can each belong. The Lord is my strength, my peace, and my song. Yet I'll lay it all down at the feet of his throne. So relax, got it still in control. He knows every care, every fear that you hold. He knows every hair, every need for your soul. Nothing new around here, this story's been told. I'm just saying there's a time in the season you gotta be a Berean. If you just hear and believe it, you could be walking with demons. It could be rendering Caesar. All the things that go to God, that's a little like treason. Wait, welcome back my friends. Did you ever really think we could pass the 10? Our socks up, we about to trend. Cause the whole 36 wanna rap again. Wait, sounds too good to be true. Like Rabbinic Candyland, ain't no ladder, just shoot. We hold true if it's loaded in the cannon. Best believe it's understanding, if it's not it ain't proof. Like sacred name of the 2-house frame. You start to tickle, then you fill it in the blanks. It's hide and seek, let's see if you can find out all the little messages you hit before the timeout. Ever seen a scholar with a blue belt? I have, he's about to make your food melt. The loud one and he strikes again, but don't let him close range, he gon' bite your friends. So relax, got it still in control. He knows every care, every fear that you hold. He knows every hair, every need for your soul. Nothing new around here, this story's been told. I bet you feel weak and your life is in tatters. With Bruce Street, your body is battered. You can't reach, trying to climb up that ladder. Sit back and hold fast till Messiah matters.
What is up? Welcome to Messiah Matters. This is show number 456. That's fun. And yeah, if you're new to this show, let me introduce myself. My name is Caleb Haig. I'm the director of a ministry called Torah Resource. We were started in 2002. We are a Messianic ministry. And plot twist, we're one law. What does that mean? Stick around. We might talk about it today. Yeah, already got a good showing in the chat room. Good to see you all there. Thanks for coming. Yeah, I've been going down the deep dive today. I have been going down a deep dive of like frustrating videos. I'm in a weird mood. I've been watching people say that. So it's interesting because my entire life I've had people tell me, "Oh, you're not Jewish," and it's been from either the Jews who are like, "Oh, your dad's Jewish, your mom's not, so you're not Jewish." Okay. Or it's from the Messianic Jews who are like, "Oh, you believe that Gentiles should keep the Torah? Well, we don't know how to deal with that, so we're just going to say you're not Jewish." And that's recently happened. I had somebody say that because I believe in one law, I'm not a Messianic Jew. And I was like, okay. Anyway, so I've been watching these videos on Messianic Judaism and from people in the MJAA and the UMJC, and my word, they really don't like Gentiles. It's pretty shocking. It's like when a person says something like, "Oh, I'm not racist," and then they say a bunch of racist things anyway. It's interesting. Anyway, okay. I don't know what's going on with my oh, I do know what's going on with my thing. Hang on just a second. Okay, you're going to lose. Apologize. Okay, refresh. Let's see what we got here this time. See if we can kick back on here. It'll come back on for you in just a few seconds, I promise. Okay, so If you are, let me tell the chat room, refresh if you need to. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. I know, riveting podcasting here. Okay, so as everyone I'm sure already knows, we've been going through this article by the IAMCS Steering Committee, written in 2014. It is atrocious. I'm not sure why anyone would keep this up online. It's really that bad. And honestly, to be completely frank, it's great that they keep it up online, because I think when people read it, the majority of people, when they read it, they're like, wow, this is what these people believe. Yeah, these people are out to lunch. That's how bad it is. Like, go ahead and keep that up there, because it's actually doing better for those of us who oppose what you're saying, because it just makes you look a little crazy. Anyway, okay. So we've been going through this article. What page are we on? Page 40. Gracious, this thing is a monster. Once we're done with it, I just don't know what we're going to do. But I said that last week, and I said, hey, please send in some emails, and let's talk. Send me topics, send me comments, questions, whatever. And we got a really good one, and we'll get to that in just 1 second. Before that, if you want to send me an email, go ahead, chegg@torahresource.com, chegg@torahresource.com. You can also call the comment line, 253-465-3205. It's 253-465-3205. You can find past episodes at messiahmatters.com, and you can go to Torah Resource for all sorts of great things. Including the library, and I think I should plug that more often. Anyway, and of course, don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. I know it sounds weird, but it really does help me. Okay. So, I think it's interesting that my brain's still in the videos that I was watching. So I think it's interesting that those who are pushing for like an anti-Gentile bent, like get the Gentiles out of our synagogues kind of a thing. I think it's interesting that they keep talking about unity, like we want unity, but then like, hey, throw all the Gentiles out. Isn't that odd? Like, let's have unity in the body of Messiah, but first, all the people we don't like, get out. All right, let's go to this email. It's a good one, and this is going to take us down a lot of different rabbit holes here. I'm going to just read the whole thing, because why not? This is from someone named David. Thank you, David, for sending this in. I really do appreciate it. This is a great email, and I'm glad we get to talk about it today. Okay, here's what David said. He said, I've been listening to your podcast now for a few months and have been enjoying it quite a bit. I've especially enjoyed the recent series on Hebrew roots and Messianic Judaism. While I don't always agree with your perspective, David, come on. How could you not always agree with my perspective? I do always find it interesting and look forward to listening to the podcast. Thank you very much, David. I appreciate that. Over the past couple months, I've built up a list of questions, comments, and criticisms that I've wanted to share with you. So I hope you'll forgive me for the long email. I will forgive you for the long email. I love it. This is an entire show worth. I love it. Here we go. First, I wanted to respond to a question you asked recently of your listeners, which was something to the effect of what they think the key defining beliefs or practices of the Hebrew roots movement are. Okay, let's pause for a second. So David's going right straight into it, and I love this. I think it's important for us to define terms. And one of the things that we've seen recently is the Messianic Jewish alphabet soup groups like the IAMCS, the MJAA, the UMJC. Back in about 2014, right about the time that the article that we've been going through was written, they do this thing. I think it's actually a tactic. They do this thing where they say, there's kind of a bad taste in people's mouth for the Hebrew roots. Let's attach the name Hebrew roots to anyone who believes in one law, because we don't like one law. And since we don't like one law, what we're going to do is we're just going to put anyone who's one law under this umbrella of a title that people don't really like. So that's what we're going to do. And now they fast forward to 2026, and they keep using this term Hebrew roots in a way that is totally opposite of the way that a lot of people use it, right? I don't think that Hebrew roots has to do. So, for instance, I contacted two Messianic Jews. They told me that I'm not Messianic Jewish, that I'm not a Messianic Jew. Why? Because I'm one law. So I'm Hebrew roots. Once again, it's not just the Gentiles they hate. Let's throw any of the Jews that we don't like over there too, right? Come on. Anyway, Anyway, I thought that was wild. Anyway, so the point here is that what I have realized is this term Hebrew roots has been kind of used by some in a favorable way that they really like. And then there's other people who are not so much in favor of this term Hebrew roots, and they see it in a different way. I think I would be like that as well, right? I don't see this as a good thing. I think that the Hebrew roots is defined by several theological aspects that I personally don't believe in, and actually the IMCS tended, like in their article, they agree on the fact that Hebrew roots is most oftenly, or at least it was in 2014, it most often was associated with two-house theology, which I've always been opposed to. I've never agreed with two-house theology. Anyway, and then all the way up to the spectrum of the IMCS and everyone, all the leaders of the alphabet groups now. And that's, so I think it's important for us to define the term. So I've asked people, hey, what do you think Hebrew roots is? Look, even though I'm not a fan of the term, if I'm Hebrew roots, okay, that's fine. I'm Hebrew roots, but I at least want to know what it is I am, because I've never actually thought that I'm Hebrew roots. My family is we started at a UMJC congregation. We didn't like their outlook on Gentiles. So my dad and others started a congregation. That's, and I've been at a Messianic synagogue literally since I was 5 or 6 years old, something like that. There's not a whole lot of time in my life that I can remember where we weren't at a Messianic Jewish synagogue. Did I just lose my camera? Good night. What is happening? I did lose my camera. Hang on. I apologize. The technology is not technologizing today. Okay. So anyway, thank you, David, for hitting this one on head first. Let's go. Okay. So this is what David says. While I don't always agree. Oh, wait. Hang on just a sec. I had been thinking about this question myself, I think because of how I had heard you say in some of your podcasts how you weren't Hebrew roots, or at least didn't identify as Hebrew roots. And I thought that was strange. Since then, I've heard you clarify why you have that perspective. So I understand your viewpoint, I think, but I would place you within the Hebrew roots movement according to my definition. Okay, that's fair. Let's hear your definition. I suppose I should give a little of my background. Okay, and this is good. We need to know where David's coming from because I think it's going to actually frame a lot of the rest of where he's going here. So let's see. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. I'm getting distracted by the chat room. You guys are making good comments. Okay, so let's go to his background. I am a lifelong Seventh-day Adventist who only fairly recently, 5 years ago, became exposed to the Hebrew roots movement, or one law, as you would say, and have since that time become convinced that the Torah is valid for all believers. I still, for the most part, attend an SDA church, and while I listen and read a lot of Hebrew roots / one law material, I have only attended Messianic or Hebrew roots congregations occasionally. My point with saying this is I don't have a historical perspective on the Hebrew roots movement that you do. So I haven't been exposed to as much of the fringe perspectives. Okay, let's pause once again. So I'm sure that a lot of the listeners who listen every single week are a little bit bored of this, but I think it's important for those who might be brand new and tuning in for the first time. The Hebrew roots and the Messianic movement actually do have two very different histories. They are two completely separate groups up until about the 80s, and then we start to see somewhat of a crossover. One law theology was not the defining marker of the Hebrew roots movement. In fact, I would argue that within a good amount of Messianic synagogues, all the way up until the 80s and 90s, there were a significant amount of one law believers and one law adherents. So that's one of the reasons that I don't associate myself with the Hebrew roots movement. However, once again, if we're, let's define it first so I can say whether or not I do or don't. Okay, so anyway, here's my list of what I think the main defining features are. Okay, here we go. And he gives us 5 defining factors of what David believes the Hebrew roots movement is. Okay, let me just make sure my camera's still on. It is. Okay. A belief that the Bible is best understood through a Hebrew cultural mindset and perspective that differs from the typical Western way of thinking. This manifests in studying ancient Bible culture and ideas and often a study of the Hebrew language. Okay, that's his first point. I would just say this is not a Hebrew roots belief. In fact, this is a hermeneutic. Okay, so the Hebrew roots might say, yeah, we need to go back to the cultural elements and understand the New Testament within a Jewish perspective. However, that's called a historical grammatical interpretation. And it's been held by scholars since Christ was on earth. That is not, there are so many Christians and Christian scholars who believe this. This is a form of hermeneutics that Walter Keicher talks about in his book on hermeneutics. In fact, this is one of the main defining factors of modern scholars who, by the way, has nothing to do with Hebrew roots or Messianic, right? If you go look at some of the, let's take, for instance, the New Perspective on Paul. These scholars, whether Christian or not, are, and by the way, they have no association with the Hebrew roots of the Messianic movement. What they have is an association with studies on Paul. We have Jimmy Dunn. We have E.P. Sanders. We have N.T. Wright, who's the Archbishop of what, Canterbury? Isn't N.T. Wright? That's probably wrong. Okay, now I got to look it up while I'm talking. So the point is, excuse me. Okay, so the point is that these scholars did exactly that. They said, look, we're not looking at the New Testament, or we're not looking at Paul from a first century Jewish perspective. We have to do that. And he writes, Archbishop of, this is for my own, of Durham. I was close. Anyway, so the point here is simply this, that the idea of reading the New Testament scriptures, the apostolic scriptures, back into their first century Jewish perspective is not a Hebrew roots. It is not a Messianic phenomenon. This is something that, like, Christian scholars have been saying for a very long time, even before the rise of the Hebrew roots and the Messianic movement. Remember that E.P. Sanders writes his book, Paul and Palestinian Judaism, in what? 76, I think it was, right? 1976. I would argue that this is before the explosion of the Hebrew roots and the Messianic movement. So there is this want to get back to, and I mean, it's a valid want, right? It's a valid want to go back. But once again, and this is not, I'm not trying to like discount David here and his ideas, or how he's trying to define the Hebrew roots movement. And David, if you wanted to define the Hebrew roots movement this way, that's totally fine. All I'm trying to say is that this first point, I would say that this is not Hebrew roots. This is Christian scholarship. Good Christian scholarship is going to take a historical, grammatical interpretation of the scriptures. They're going to look at the New Testament and say, we have to go back to what the culture that these people were in, and we have to do that so we can understand what in the world they're talking about. Once we do that, then we have to understand the theological position they're in as well. And so this, for me, is just a good Christian scholarly perspective on hermeneutics. Okay, number 2. God's covenant with Israel is enduring and is still active today. This is a rejection of replacement theology, although I think there is room for variations on belief of the status of the Jewish people and the state of Israel today. Okay, now we're actually, to me, this is where we're starting to look at what I think defines various groups, right? The idea that the covenant, and we should say covenants, and I'm pretty sure that David would agree with me on this, but the idea that the covenants endure today. Yes, and we're going to see, so David has already told us that he is a Seventh-day Adventist, and I've been looking into Ellen G. White because of one of the questions that he's going to ask down the road here, but Ellen G. White and others who form the Seventh-day Adventists, they come to this belief that the Sabbath should be kept, and if you look at like Bach-Yaki, right, who is a Seventh-day Adventist, and probably, I don't know, everybody says his last name wrong, differently, but if you look at Bachiochi and the work that he did, he tried to trace Sabbath observance all the way from Christ all the way through to our modern era, and different groups that did it. There were, and we see this all around the world, right, that there were different groups that were celebrating the Sabbath or were keeping a clean diet or whatever it may be. They were, there's the African group. I remember the video that went viral a couple years ago, when some missionaries went to a tribal village in Africa, and the people said the Shema every day, right? I mean, so, and not that went back to Christ, but I'm just saying that they're like throughout history, we can always kind of point and say, oh yeah, these people were keeping the Sabbath. The Seventh-day Baptists were keeping the Sabbath all the way back to the Reformation, right? So, yes, I agree. Why am I bringing all this up? I agree with David that this is somewhat of a defining element of the modern day Hebrew roots / Messianic movement. This idea that the covenants endure. However, I would say that this is something that the Christians have also believed in one form or another. Now, they're going to describe this in different ways. Westminster Catechism, right, talks about the idea that we need to keep the Sabbath. Granted, they say it's on Sunday, but ultimately the point is that I think that this is more. So let me give credit where credit is due here. David is right. This is a defining factor within the rise of both movements, I think, Messianic Judaism and the Hebrew Roots movement, right? I think that this is a defining factor. However, I also want to say, when we really look at it, this defining factor, or this element that we see within both of these groups, is also present throughout Christianity in certain forms. And so I think we think, oh yeah, the covenants endure. This is new. This is like something for these that has come up in these movements. I think it's just that these movements take that idea that's already present within Christianity and bolster it and bring it to the forefront. That's what I think. Now, people can disagree with me on that, but that's what I think. Okay. Number 3, all people and nations are invited to join into God's covenant. God's promises were specifically to Israel, but other people who want to follow God can join in and become part of Israel, like Paul states in Ephesians 2, as well as other places such as Isaiah 56. Yeah, so this idea of Jew and Gentile keeping the Torah together, I would say that this is probably one of the main threads that connects the Hebrew Roots movement. I agree with that. I actually think it's one of the main threads that connects the Messianic movement as well. And contrary to what the UMJC and the MJAA have said, the fact, I was watching a video, one of the guys from Two Messianic Jews admitted that there's only 40% ethnic Jews in his congregation. I mean, that's a pretty big admit, right? So the fact is that even though they are anti-Gentile and they're trying to get anyone who believes that the law is for Gentiles out of their congregations, the truth is that I think that the majority of people in the MJAA and UMJC congregations are in fact one law. I think it's a majority. So anyway, the point here is, okay, I'll give this to David. All people and all nations are invited to join into God's covenant. I actually believe that this theological perspective is still being hashed out within both movements, the Messianic movement and the Hebrew Roots movement. And I think that the idea of enlargement theology is starting to become more of a Christian thing. So Jason Staples and Paul and the Resurrection of Israel, I think this is kind of, and this is not the only book that he's written on it, but it's the one I'm currently reading. I think it shows that Christianity is coming on board as well. Yeah, and Mike in the chat room says 40% is high. I bet it's lower. Yeah, you're probably right. The thing that they don't realize is that even though the Gentiles are saying, "Oh yeah, we want to give Jews like their identity or whatnot," the majority of the Gentiles in the UMJC and MJAA congregations are one law in one way or another. They might not come right out and say, "Oh, I'm one law," but that's the truth. Okay, so I'm just gonna give David number 3, right? I'm gonna give David number 3. So yeah, and Mike says, I've also associated the Hebrew roots with the lost tribes teaching. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the defining factors. Sacred name, two-house theology. We're going to talk about all that in a few minutes. Okay. The Torah, number 4, the Torah. By the way, once again, I hope this doesn't sound harsh to David. I really do appreciate this. And good on you for making a list of, how you're seeing the Hebrew roots. I don't want you to feel like I'm just trying to bash your ideas here. I think they're great discussion points. So anyway, okay, number 4. The Torah is God's instruction for behavior for all of his covenant people, one law. And we're not to add or subtract from it. Yeah, I agree. I think, and I've said before, I'll say it again, I think that this is one of the defining factors that unifies the Hebrew roots movement. There is so much disunity within the Hebrew roots movement. This is one of the defining factors. I agree. However, once again, even though the leaders of the Messianic Jewish movement do not want to admit it, I think it's also one of the defining factors of Messianic Judaism. And I think the chat room agrees with me, right? If you, not the leaders, you got a couple of loud leaders that are writing the books, writing the articles, and they're on the YouTubes. But outside of them, the people in the pews are one law. That's what I believe. And, I've said it so many times on this show. One of the ways I know that is because they call me. They call me and talk to me. Oh, I go to blank's congregation. Oh, the teacher that wrote the article you're talking about, I go to his congregation and we talk about XYZ. So, this kind of stuff. Yeah, I think it's a much bigger percentage than people realize. Okay, number 5 and final. Every person, Jew or Gentile, pre or post Christ, are saved by God's grace through faith. Yes, but this is certainly not a Hebrew roots doctrine. Once saved through, we are commanded and expected to follow God's covenant instructions, and we will be judged by our obedience to what we know. This is not salvation by works. We can't earn salvation through our efforts, but we also can't have a place in God's kingdom if we are unwilling to follow God's laws. It's not about walking perfectly, but a commitment to following God and repentance when we fall short. Yeah, I might say that differently. However, I would say that number 5, this is certainly an evangelical doctrine. The Reformation brought this into. If you go watch R.C. Sproul, if you go watch John Piper, if you watch Alistair Begg, these guys are all going to tell you that you were saved the exact same way before Christ came as after, and that we're brought into covenant through faith, not by works. But once we come into faith, then we obey God. The works come after that. So this is, to me, this is an evangelical Christian doctrine, not a Hebrew roots doctrine. It is not. Now, granted, David does expand it to say all of the Torah, right? So we keep the Torah. This is part of the covenant, and so that's probably the nuance that he's getting at there, which is fine. Okay, let's keep going then. That's how I see the core of the Hebrew roots movement. What do you think? Okay. On another subject, there have been a few recent podcasts where you've made comments regarding Seventh-day Adventists, and I wanted to ask a couple of questions and make a comment or two. Okay, so let me just say this before we jump into this, okay? My interactions with Seventh-day Adventists have not been huge. I know a lot of Seventh-day Adventists who have come from Seventh-day Adventist Church into the Torah movement, right? And so that's my main interaction. My family attended a Seventh-day Adventist church a couple of times when we were looking for a congregation. But outside of that, I haven't studied Ellen G. White in depth. But I have done some searches online to see what people say. And I think that my viewpoint of the Seventh-day Adventists is probably a lot more favorable than maybe mainstream evangelicalism. Okay, so let's go. Hang on just a second. If I'm remembering correctly, you seemed to view them as maybe on the edge of Orthodox Christianity. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Probably within the fold, but maybe on the border. Am I remembering correctly? Yeah, I think I'd say that. I was wondering if you'd elaborate on that perspective. Sure, absolutely. And actually, not only that, but before I elaborate, let's just say that just because someone follows a false prophet does not necessarily mean that they are not a believer in Yeshua, right? I think that there are a lot of people who come along and make these prophecies, or they say God said, or whatever it may be, and people follow them. The people in the pews that are following these false prophets are not necessarily outside of the fold. And I think a perfect example of this would be, I think most evangelicals would say that Tertullian, who is credited often for coming up with the term Trinity, the word Trinity, Tertullian was a believer. He's considered one of the church fathers. However, Tertullian followed a false Messiah, right? And there is debate on whether or not he ever came back from that, right? Which person did Tertullian follow? Let's see what the web says. Montanus. Yes, in the latter part of his life, Tertullian followed Montanus, the founder of the 2nd century prophetic and ascetic Christian movement known as Montanism, or a new prophecy. And if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong on this, but Tertullian, I think, actually hailed him as the Messiah. And yet, for some reason, Christianity has held him continually as a church father. So what is my point here? It's not to put down the church and say, oh, your church fathers are often in la land. It's rather just to say, just because a person follows after the teaching of a person, whether that person is correct or not, doesn't make them a heretic, doesn't place them outside of orthodoxy. However, I would say that I personally think that, and wait, let's stop again, because we have a lot of this in the Hebrew Roots movement, right? Michael Rood falsely prophesied the Great Tribulation starting on 9/9/99. Monty Judah falsely prophesied the tribulation starting, I think it was 97. I have those papers. Right? There's a lot of Monty Judah said that the book of Hebrews should be ripped out of your Bible. Okay. Are they right? Of course they're not right. But I know a lot of people who have come to the Torah and have come closer to God because through people like Monty Judah and through people like Michael Rood. Does that make them right? No. But it means that just because somebody has listened to the teaching of somebody, that doesn't make them a heretic. So people can listen to Ellen G. White and like Ellen G. White's teaching and writings and everything. That doesn't make them heretics. So if you take Ellen G. White out of it, and we'll talk more about her in a second. If you take Ellen G. White out of it, then what is the SDA really, what is their teaching that everybody attacks? Well, the evangelical Christian church attacks the idea that they think that the Sabbath is on Saturday, not on Sunday. I agree with that. So if you take that out, then what do you have? Well, you have believers. You have, are there problems within the SDA? Yeah, I think that there are problems within pretty much every denomination. Do I think that they're so egregious that we would say they're outside of the fold, that they're not believers? No, I wouldn't say that. Okay, let's keep going. While I have changed some of my beliefs over the past few years regarding SDA doctrine, I still think they have it mostly correct, and I feel blessed to have grown up in that tradition and had the Sabbath as a regular practice for all of my life. Yeah, and actually, when my family was attending a SDA church, I was not raised SDA. I think everybody knows that. When we were attending an SDA church, it was great. We had a great time with them. They worshiped on Saturday. We were, we couldn't figure out why they weren't celebrating the festivals. However, the group that we went to, they had a lunch buffet afterwards, and after their service, and I was like, oh great, here we go. Here comes the pork and the shellfish, we got to ask everything. Nope. Everything that they had was vegetarian. And I was like, all right, this is awesome, right? We can eat everything here. So anyway, let's keep going. I do remember you saying that Ellen G. White was a false prophet, and I wonder what you feel she prophesied that was false. Okay, so once again, I am not an Ellen G. White scholar. I don't actually care to look into her teachings a ton, and maybe I'm wrong for that, but I have rested on other people who have either come out of Seventh-day Adventism, and that might not always be fair. Why is that not fair? Because oftentimes the detractors are the ones who might paint people in the wrong the most. However, I have put two links in the description of this YouTube video. And I found this, this is not the first time that I've read this kind of thing, but this is a blog called The Thinking Cup. This guy did come out of Seventh-day Adventism, so I'm not sure if his outlook is going to be pure, but he does reference quite a bit. He's got a lot of references, and a lot, he always takes it back to Ellen G. White's own teachings, and you know, I don't know, the Watchtower's Jehovah's Witness, right? Letter from D.A. Dalefield. I mean, the Pillars. Oh, the Pillars. That's what it was, right? The Pillars was the Seventh-day Adventist. Anyway, so the point is that I put two in there. I put number 1 and number 2. He's got a 2-part series here. And in the first one, he kind of goes through, he doesn't really talk about any of the false teachings or the false prophecies, I think you would say, given by Ellen G. White, but he sets it up. And in the second one, he does go through those. I'll rest on that because, I mean, once again, not an Ellen G. White scholar. Man, the chat room is going nuts. Okay, let me look at the chat room real quick. We got to jump in here. I thought Lost Tribes and Two House essentially believed the same thing, that people who desire to keep the Torah are ethnic Israel. Gotcha. Thank you. Okay. Yes, God is calling you back home, even though the rest of your family still rejects the Torah. Yeah. And the sanctuary doctrine. What is that? It seems to me that all Hebrew roots are one law, but not all one law folks are Hebrew roots. Yes, I agree with that. It's SDA's answer to the failed return of the Lord in the 1800s, aka Millerite movement. Curious question. Seventh-day Adventists believe in the dead are not conscious until the resurrection. What is your take on consciousness or no consciousness after death? I actually don't have a problem with the SDA teaching on soul sleep. I'm fine with that. I don't think it's a heretical doctrine. However, Ellen G. White, according to what I've read today, Ellen G. White was an annihilationist. Now, I personally don't believe in annihilationism, but, I mean, Chris Date, who is, I think, Chris Date, who is, I think, the foremost scholar on annihilationism, is a friend of mine. I consider him a friend. We get lunch from time to time. He lives here in my area. He is very generous in his debates and in his way of talking to people. And he hasn't convinced me, but I don't think he's a heretic because he believes in annihilationism. Just because you don't believe in the eternal torment of the wicked does not mean that you're going to hell, right? I mean, come on. So, yeah, I don't have a problem with the SDA, the idea of soul sleep. I do not believe in purgatory, at least not the way that it's been taught by the Catholic Church. So, that's where I stand on that. Okay, let's keep going. Where were we? While I have changed some of my beliefs, over the past few years regarding the SDA doctrine, I still think they have it mostly correct and I feel blessed. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I think that's fine. I do remember you saying that Ellen G. White and I have given references, not simply a false or incorrect teaching, but a false prophet. Yeah, she said, so from what I understand, White came forward and said she had visions and that they were essentially in the tribulation, and that Christ's return was imminent, and that clearly didn't happen. And so that, in my book, would say we're pretty much in false prophet land. I know Seventh-day Adventists often treat everything she wrote as direct from God, but I don't think that is the case, or even how she regarded her own writings. Okay, so the first article that I link gives multiple attestation of her So I want to see where this. So he says, I'll just read a little bit of this. They aggressively edited so that the statements inside the quarterly reflect the church's proper understanding of the topics at hand. Quote: "The Bible and the writings of Ellen White are inerrant." And I'll be fair, because did I lose my camera again? I did. Sorry, guys. I will be fair here because the SDA church that we went to, hang on, I am trying to get there we go. The SDA church that we went to, I asked him, I said, do you hold Ellen G. White as a true prophet? And he's like, no, I think that she has great teachings, but we don't hold her writings on par with Scripture. And I said, well, that's a turn from the mainstream SDA church. And the pastor said to me, yes, there are some SDA churches that believe that her writings were inerrant and are God-breathed. We don't hold to that. So I think that there is a split within the modern day SDA church. Ellen G. Wright gives advance church himself. Okay. We believe the revelation and inspiration of, this is once again from an SDA writing, we believe the revelation and inspiration of both the Bible and Ellen White's writings to be of equal quality. The superintendence of the Holy Spirit was just as careful and thorough in one case as in the other. Let's see what the reference is. The reference on 4 is ministry. Oh, it's from their the ministry magazine, October 1981. That's an SDA. That's an SDA magazine. So, yes, I understand that there are SDAs who do not believe that Ellen G. White was like her writing should be up on par with Scripture. However, it seems to me, at least from as this person is presenting it, and from the excerpts that he is grabbing, it seems to me that the SDA church has believed that throughout history, since she was here on earth, has believed that her writings were in fact inerrant. Okay, final point in this section, you said something about how Seventh-day Adventists view themselves as the chosen people. I don't think that's correct. While there is certainly an aspect of viewing Adventists as a special people for the most part, Adventism follows Arminianism rather than Calvinism. So the viewpoint is not that we're chosen, but we are the people truly following God's commands, the remnant. Yeah, exactly. Well, if you're the remnant, then what are you? You're the covenant members, while the other people who claim to be covenant members are not. Right? I mean, the idea of the remnant is that there is a believing remnant, and then there's an unbelieving remnant. The unbelieving remnant is what? On the outside of covenant membership. So the idea of being the chosen people is not necessarily a Calvinistic view, or this is not about Calvinism or Arminianism. So I think what I might be getting here is David is conflating the idea of being chosen with the idea of Calvinism. Israel was chosen, the chosen people. The idea of being chosen in this framework, I think, has to do with being covenant members. So the way that I've understood the SDA, and I think that David might be right here, though. And once again, I haven't grown up in this movement, so he probably knows a lot better than me. But the idea that I've understood the Seventh-day Adventist is, okay, yes, we have the truth, we're following the commands, but there are other Christians who are also within the fold, right? It's not just that if you're not SDA, you're out. So I'll give you that. I'll give David that. I think that's probably right. Let's check the chat room one more time. Most believe her writings are on par or above Scripture, except the younger generations. You should do a deep dive into SDA doctrine. They are lovely people, but some of their doctrines are way off. Yes, the older generations definitely believe that the SDA church is the only true church. Okay. Let's keep going. So this is great because it's probably going to take up our entire hour here, which is fine. And then next week, we'll jump back into this one law, two sticks. In one of your recent podcasts, you mentioned how you have grown to be more willing to accept differences in belief and doctrine, such as views on the nature of God, etc. You can accept those people into fellowship, even if not wanting them to teach. Yes. However, I would say that this is not. Yes, I've said that, but it's the shift is not necessarily. So, for instance, I have a dear brother who. I got to be careful with my wording here. I have a dear friend who is a member who was a member of the congregation that I pastored from the day that it was put together. And he denied the deity of Yeshua. He and I went round and round and round. And I told him, hey, you're allowed to come to the congregation and be a part with us and whatnot, but you can't, you can't try to convince other people that Yeshua is not deity. And he said, not a problem. And he didn't. He was very respectful. I still see him often. And like I said, he's a dear friend of mine. So I think people get the sense that I am fire and brimstone if you disagree with me. And at one point in my life, that certainly may have been true, but I don't think that has been the case for quite some time. Our church started in 2017, I think it was, and they were there from the beginning, my friend. So, yeah. All right. I think that's a good perspective. I've come to that recently myself. I think God cares a lot more about how we interact with each other and how we follow him than what we specifically think about doctrines that aren't spelled out in detail. So I do think that there are doctrines that are spelled out in detail within the scriptures. However, I think everybody's on their own. This is going to sound very liberal. I think everybody's on their own journey, right? And I think that everybody's on their own journey of trying to follow and be in a relationship with Hashem, with God. And so the point for me is that, look, I'm doing the best I can here, right? I'm trying really hard to come close to God, to draw near to God, to worship God, to follow God, to be a friend to God, if that's the proper term, to worship the King in my life and in the way that I live. And if you're trying to do that too, I might disagree with you on how you're doing it. I might disagree with you on what you believe. But at the same time, you know what? Over time, we tend to be able to find our similarities instead of our differences, and I think that is very important. So, and of course, as I have said many times, it really comes down to persecution. During persecution, I would say that all our denominational lines pretty much go away. We should focus less on doctrine and more on practice, I think. Okay. You made some recent criticisms of some people in the Hebrew Roots movement, the Torah movement, specifically those that use God's name and those that don't follow the traditional Jewish holiday calendar. I don't think it was criticism. It was just drawing lines, right? So my definition, that's how I define the Hebrew Roots movement, right? Sacred Nameism, and two-house theology, and different calendars. Look, if I walk into a congregation, they're like, oh yeah, we're on a different calendar. Okay, that's fine. Like, I'm not like, oh, you're a heretic. No, it just tells me if you're on a different calendar, then you're probably leaning over into the Hebrew Roots movement. That's what it tells me. Okay. Specifically, you said something like you don't understand why anyone would do that. Forgive the criticism, but I find that to be at least a little disingenuous. So it depends what you mean. Which one? You've brought up two issues. Sacred name, and you've brought up calendar issues. When it comes to calendar issues, yeah, I don't understand why people would do that. And the reason why is because these lines were fought not only within Judaism, but we know what side Yeshua was on. So we follow a Jewish rabbi, and that Jewish rabbi was in the temple during the holidays. He followed the temple calendar, the calendar that the temple was on, which was a Pharisaic calendar. We know that Yeshua followed a calendar. So yes, I don't understand why anybody would take a different calendar. Basically what they're saying is, okay, and look, I get it. I get the Hillel calendar was standardized. I know why it was standardized, and I get that people think that certain aspects of it might be off. However, the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God, and I think that part of that is the fact that when they standardized the calendar so that all Jews together can celebrate these festivals, I think they did that in a good way. I think that it's a way that we should respect it and follow it. That's what I think. So I personally think that when you have different calendars, what it is a push against all things Jewish, all things rabbinic, right? We don't want to do it like we want to make it up our own way. And I think that that's a problem. But I suppose David's right. Disingenuous because I don't understand why anyone would do that. Yeah, I mean, I suppose I understand why people would do that. I disagree with it. I don't think it's right. So anyway, can you really not understand why people would do that? I think that if you're following Yeshua, and we see the example in the apostolic scriptures, I don't understand why you'd be on a different calendar. People are trying their best to follow God in the way they understand the Bible and how they feel God is calling them out to act. So, by the way, let me just pause real quick. Yeah, I understand what David is saying here, and yes, maybe I'm inflating my criticism a bit. However, I have not said that these people are heretics or that I wouldn't worship with them. I grew up in a congregation where there was a small group of people who believed in a different calendar. We didn't say, you better get out, right? Like, you're not on the same calendar as us, you better get out, right? It wasn't that. So I'm not saying that it's like, oh, you're a heretic. I don't understand why people would want to follow a different calendar than Yeshua. He's the pinnacle for me, right? So... But people have their reasons. So David's right. Okay, let's keep going. It's fine to criticize the practice, but to say you can't understand makes it seem like there's no basis for what they are doing. Okay. I don't want to be disingenuous again, but okay. For instance, in following a different calendar, there is even differences in historical and current practices in the Jewish world, which is based on a certain biblical viewpoint. I would say the overwhelming, and I mean overwhelming majority of all sects of Judaism, whether it's from Reform all the way up to ultra-Orthodox, are on the exact same calendar. And the reason they are is because they standardized the calendar so that all Jews could be on that calendar. And the standardization was made for people so that Jews in the diaspora could worship with everyone. And so I see the standardization as a good thing and an important thing. And I think, once again, that the oracles of God were given to the Jewish people. And so when they did something like that to try to make it so that everyone could be on that, yeah, I think that was a very important thing. I think Yeshua not only would have followed it, I think he did follow it. We know that the calendar shifted within the first century, and it was shifted by the people. Right? When were the years intercalated? Well, guess what? The people decided that. And when I say people, I don't mean like the Am Haaretz. I don't mean like the farmers. There were it was the temple complex. The Pharisees, the leaders of the Pharisees decided that. And Yeshua followed them in that. So it seems to me that Yeshua gives us a pretty clear example of following those who shifted the calendar. When was the new moon sighted? Was it when there was was it NASA-like precision, or was it by the temple? And did they fudge that? We know that they fudged it, right? And Yeshua followed them in that too. So, I mean, I hate to be dogmatic about it, but yeah, I think that the arguments for keeping a different calendar are not good arguments, and I don't think that they are historically. I don't think that they take all the historical facts into the balance. With that said, once again, I have very good friends who hold to a different calendar, and you know what? We get along, and you know what? We worship God on the same days because some of us give and some of us, take, and then some of us give and some of us take. Okay. So which calendar is right? I have mine on two bell. Yeah. Okay. So there's a discussion on Zeet in the chat room right now. Okay. Let's keep going. I want to finish this by the end of the show. You have criticized the sacred name movement, very much so. At least a few times in this podcast I've heard. What exactly do you consider a sacred namer? Okay. Well, let's take his example first, and then I'll tell you. For example, I believe God gave us his name and wants us to use it, but I don't think there is anything magical about using his name, nor do I have a problem with people saying Jesus instead of Yeshua, or God instead of Yah or Yehovah, or whatever flavor you happen to prefer. So would that make me a sacred namer? No, it would not. I'm not going to be offended if the answer is yes. Just trying to understand how you use the term. Sacred Nameism is an actual movement of people, and it is an actual theological doctrine. The Sacred Name movement believes that, and it's interesting because there's different flavors. So whatever you, hang on, I'm being referenced in the chat room. There is no unity when 7 or 8 different calendars are in the mix. The latest is the Zodiac calendar, no doubt. Look up Karaite Tzitzit. There's nothing wrong with them. Really? I'm just making a jab. Nice. Okay. So initially I think it was the 40s is when this started, but it takes off in the 60s, I believe. The Sacred Name movement believed that if you didn't say the name, and I don't know what the pronunciation was back then. It might have been Yahweh. It might have been Jehovah. Who knows? But they said if you don't use the name as we believe it is to be said, which is, pick your flavor. Let's pretend for a few seconds it's Yahweh. If you don't say Yahweh, if you say God, or you say you say Lord in your prayers instead of Yahweh, then God doesn't hear your prayers. You're not praying to the right God. And if you're not praying to the right God, you're not saved. So only through the name that we believe is the right name can you pray. Now, this expanded, and in the 80s, it kind of flies into a bunch of different pronunciations. So it's not just, Lou White comes along, and then he's like, well, it's actually Jehovah. It's not Yahweh. And people are like, oh, my word. So then you get this split within the Sacred Name movement. And they're like, okay, this group says if you don't say Yahweh, then you're praying to a false god. This group says if you say Yahweh, you're actually praying to a false god. That's not the real name. You have to pray to Jehovah. That's the real name. And if you don't pray to Jehovah, then God is not hearing you. And the truth is that what they're taking is the Tetragrammaton, the 4-letter name of God. And there's a hour-long teaching on Torah Resources, totally free. And you can go watch it right now. And my father went through all of the different variations within the Torah. The truth is that the Masoretes, the people who wrote the Torah scrolls, what they did was they put the vowels for the name Adonai on the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, on the sacred name of God. And so they did that to signal the person, don't say this name. Say Adonai instead of trying to pronounce Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And the reason why was because the Jews believed that the name was so sacred that only the priest should use it in the temple. And so it was essentially lost to pronunciation. There are all sorts of teachers out there who claim to know the name. The most prominent is probably Nehemia Gordon, who is not a believer in Yeshua and is just, I am convinced now. I've had lunch with Nehemia before. I had beers with him one time in Denver. I've chatted with him before, and he's a very nice fellow. Right, he's a nice guy, but I am pretty convinced that he's just greasing the believers. He doesn't bring this stuff to the SBL and present papers on it. Why not? He is the current chair of the Masoretic section at the SBL. Yeah, he would never give a paper on his beliefs when it came to the sacred name there. Why? Because he's greasing the palms of the believers. He knows that it's nonsense, but he's making a buck out of it. I honestly believe that. So anyway, the point is that we don't know how to pronounce that name. More recently, you have a shift within the name of Yeshua. I don't care. People can say Jesus. People can say Yeshua. We know that the shift that has happened with the Et Sefer Bible and the idea of this name Yahusha, that's made up. There's absolutely no basis for this whatsoever. I don't think that the people who believe in the idea of Yahusha, like this name, personally, I think that's a work of Satan. What I mean by that is I think that confusion, I think that the evil one loves to bring confusion. Do I think people are going to hell because they use the term Yahusha, the name Yahusha? No, absolutely not. But do I think that I think that the demons sit back and laugh because there's so much confusion. We know that the name Yahusha is not right, but I've never seen a person who uses the name Yahusha over Jesus or Yeshua say, if you don't use the name Yahusha, then then your prayers aren't heard, or you're believing in a false Messiah or something like that. So I wouldn't even consider that to be sacred nameism. Sacred nameism is when you believe that a person is not saved if they're using the name Jesus, or if they say Christ, or if they say God or Lord. That's sacred nameism. It is a very specific theology. And yeah, it is a mark of the Hebrew Roots movement. And it's one of the theologies that actually formed the Hebrew Roots movement. Okay, last paragraph here. And once again, we got a lot in the chat room. I agree to proclaim certain words holy or sacred, or else is a form of legalism. Yahavah and Yashavasha, never even seen that one. If they want to be true to the Hebrewish. That's funny. Okay. Not to mention, we don't even truly know the definitive pronunciation. I deal with this regularly with some people I know. Okay. So, yeah. Last paragraph here. One last point before I close. A month or so ago, you criticized Nehemia Gordon as basically a charlatan. That's right. I just did again. I don't remember the specific comment, but it was essentially that he was exploiting people for money in his promotion of Jehovah as the pronunciation of God's name. That is correct. I truly believe he is doing that. I found that criticism to be unjust, even bearing false witness. Okay, let's talk about this even more. I sat down with Nehemia Gordon at lunch in, where was it? In Texas. And we asked him about this. He got very upset. Because Rob and I then went and did a podcast and said, yeah, we think that he's greasing the wheels, right? We think that he's just teaching this to ignorant Hebrew rooters. He came back and he actually showed up at a lecture that Rob was giving to confront him on the accusation. And Rob said to him, look, you spew all this stuff on YouTube towards the believers in Yeshua, but you have every opportunity to come to the Masoretic section of SBL and present it, and you don't. Why not? And you know what Nehemia Gordon said? Nothing. He said nothing. You know why he said nothing? Because it's true. He now chairs that section. He knows the Hebrew, but he knows that he would get laughed out of the room by the experts. So this is not bearing false witness. I've talked to him about this. I sat and told him, I said, if you want legitimacy within the Messianic and Hebrew Roots movement, why are you going around and teaching with Michael Rood? And he was like, well, Michael Rood's a good guy. And I was like, you know that like in every single teaching that Michael Rood has, he says something that's false. So why are you jumping on the bandwagon with him? He's like, well, that's not necessarily true. Yes, it is. And Nehemia Gordon knows it. Look, Gordon when you meet him, he's a really nice guy to be around. And he's jolly and jovial, and he's a pleasant person, right? He makes people around him feel good. He's, that's what he does. He's a nice person. But that dude is scamming people to make a buck. And if he's not, then he can prove it. And all he has to do is bring his stuff to dude, he had to ask, as the chair of the Masoretic section, he had to ask Rob Van Hoff to go and present on why what he's saying was wrong. But he still hasn't presented in this section. Why? Because he knows that he's greasing it. He knows that he's falsely teaching this to believers. And guess what? He's making a lot of money doing it. So if he wants to prove me wrong, great. Present at the Masoretic section at the SBL. Let's see it. It's a real, and you know what? That wouldn't be hard. All he has to do is approve his own paper. He might not be a believer in Yeshua, but I think he's an honest person. No, he's not. Genuinely seeking God, and I have learned a lot from him. Well, that's fine. You can learn whatever you want. He's disingenuous in a ton of things. Dude, he just did this. He did another video with Gateway to Israel where he's talking about the Hebrew gospel of Matthew. What he doesn't tell anyone is that the Hebrew gospel of Matthew has been found on the same list as the gospel of Matthew and put in the spurious category as opposed to the gospel of Matthew, which is put in the accepted category. It's clear that it's two different books, but he didn't want to tell anybody that. Dude, he's not stupid. Nehemia Gordon is extremely intelligent. He got a legit doctorate. He's done like real work in linguistic stuff. He is a very well trained Hebrewist. He knows his Hebrew very well. He's worked in the Dead Sea Scrolls. He's not stupid. It does not take very much to look at the evidence and say, what would the other scholars, what would my peers say about this? Oh, they would excoriate me, so I'm not going to say it around them. Instead, I'm going to say it in this really small group of people who are going to give me a bunch of money. Come on. If you have specific criticisms of his research, that's fine, even good. Please share that. But when he's done so much work on this topic, even finding multiple instances of Jewish medieval literature which specifically states what the vowels of the name are. Oh, see, and this is why I get ticked off about Nehemia Gordon. You have been swindled, sir. You have been swindled. I think dismissing his work with a glib remark that he's exploiting people is very unfair. It's not unfair, and the reason why is because the proof is in the pudding. Once again, have you seen him present at SBL? No. And you know what? When my dad confronted him at SBL about this, right? Ben Noonan is sitting there with his wife, Dr. Noonan and Dr. Noonan, and my dad says, well, what about this in the Hebrew? And he says, well, Nehemia Gordon tries to push back, and he just looks at the Noonans and says, am I right? And they were like, yeah, the fact is that if you want to uphold Nehemia Gordon's work, that's great. But Nehemia Gordon doesn't believe in his work enough to put it in front of the people who matter, the people who would push back on it from a scholarly perspective. I don't have to prove anything. The proof is that he doesn't care enough. He doesn't believe in his own work enough to put it in front of people who know what they're talking about. That's the point. Instead, he puts it in front of people who are willing to take a unbeliever at his word. And why do you think that he doesn't present this to the Jews? Why do you think he doesn't present it to anyone else? The only people he presents it to is the Hebrew roots. That's it. So, this is one of those things where when I talked to Nehemia Gordon when we were in Denver, Colorado, I sat down and had beers with him, and I walked away from that conversation. And I was like, you know what? Maybe he's right. Maybe he seems really genuine and he seems really honest and he's just trying to follow the Lord. And then Rob came along and he's like, dude, what are you talking about? Look at this, and this. And when I look at the literature, when I look at the facts, I'm like, dude, this guy, he's trying to swindle me now. He's trying to pull the wool over my eyes. And if he wasn't, then he would do what any scholar would do. You have some groundbreaking, look, it's anytime a scholar has a groundbreaking revelation, what do? They go present it at either ETS or SBL. And Nehemia Gordon is the chair of the Masoretic section. This is his thing. Yet he won't present one paper on it in the Masoretic section. What does that tell you? What does that tell you? Because it tells me something very specific. It tells me that he's making a buck off the Hebrew roots people who are gullible enough to listen to the nonsense that he's spewing to them. But he will not present that in front of the people who know their Hebrew and know the Masoretes. He won't do it with the Jews and he won't do it with the Christians. He only does it with the Hebrew rooters. That to me says everything that needs to be said. I'm sure he'll be there this year. He'll be at SBL. He's chairing that committee. And guess what? Van Hoff, once again, is presenting another paper in that section. All of us are going to be there, right? Like Wilbur's going to be there. Brown's going to be there. I'm going to be there. Van Hoff's going to be there. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And I'm sure we're all going to go see Van Hoff present at this section. And guess who's going to be sitting at the table right next to him, listening to him? Gordon. But I would put $100 on the fact that Gordon's not going to present on any of this nonsense about the sacred name. Why? Because he doesn't really believe it. If he did, he'd present it. Yeah, Fort Worth says Karaites are few and far between, and he's not finding an audience with the rabbinic community, so he goes looking to the Hebrew roots camp. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And he's been called on it. That's the other thing. He's been called on it. All right, we got a super chat. Look at me all verklempt here because of Nehemia Gordon. All right, but you know what? The Lord's in control, and so this is, I mean, great. If you want to believe in Nehemia Gordon, go for it. Go for it. He fuels the sacred name movement. Okay. Rushki Bear, thanks for the super chat. Let's give you a super chat. Now, I haven't actually used this board in weeks, months, perhaps. Let's do man, it's been so long.
Your mom goes to college.
But I wasn't saved.
Weights and measures.
You've been blessed.
Yeah. Thank you for the super chat, Rushki Bear. We appreciate it. All right, that's going to do it for me today. Hey, David, thank you very much for the email. I really do appreciate it. Look, I might get worked up, but honestly, this kind of stuff is the kind of stuff that I think actually matters because it not only fuels conversation for this show, but I have a very, very good friend who's just coming into Torah observance, and knowing some of these kind of landmines that you might step on walking into the movement, I think it's so important for us to continually go back and talk about them. Things like the sacred name movement or two-house theology or whatever it may be. So I don't want David to think in any way that I'm upset about this email or anything. I actually see it as a blessing. And I think that to David's credit, I think that there is a lot more room for us to look at the SDA and say, hey, you know what? We might not agree on X, Y, Z, but I'm not going to call you a heretic, and come on in. Let's chat. So yeah, I appreciate the email very much. If you have more, if anybody has more, please go ahead. Feel free. Send them on over. chegg@torahresource.com. CHEGG at torahresource.com. That is my email address. I read every email that comes in. 253-465-3205. That's the number you can reach me at. You won't talk to me. You'll just talk to an answering machine. And please, once again, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Hit the like button. All right. I hope this conversation has done at least one thing, and that is to glorify our great God and Savior, Yeshua the Messiah. Why? You know why. Because Messiah matters.